Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 170.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cashflow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
Okay, guys, you know what time it is, and welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I am your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad to be here. And more importantly, I am glad that I've got your undivided attention. That's right, undivided attention. Put down the dishes, get off the treadmill, and listen, because I think you're going to be excited for what we've got to talk about today. Because if you've looked at the title, you know it's all about cash flow, baby. That's what we're going to talk about today. We've got the primo guest to be able to help us understand it even better than you think you already do. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, for those of you joining us for the first time, you want to do this following thing, and you want to do it right now. Go over to learninvestingnow.com. Again, that's learninvestingnow.com. Guess what you're going to do there? You're going to learn investing and now, so that you have the ability to get started on your journey. Let us help you create cash flow with Cashflow Diary, because it gets exciting the more you know. And when you begin to see these processes working for you, man, life changes. Speaking of life change, today's guest knows a lot about cash flow. He's been investing for over 20 years. I can only imagine. Podcasting isn't even that old. He's been investing longer than the iPhone, which for some of you sounds like, wow, that's a long time. And then he's the founder of Platinum Property Network, as well as a fellow podcaster, and recently has put on the hat of real estate developer, which is exciting. It's another way of saying when you start in real estate, you have no clue where you're going to end up. The point is get started and let it happen, because you will grow as the process happens to you. So do me a favor, listen, learn, and welcome Mr. Jason Hartman. You there?
Hey, Jay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. It's great to be with you, and I really enjoy your show. You've had a lot of great guests on your show, and you're doing good stuff, so it's great to be here.
Thank you. And we're adding one more with you here today. One of the things that I like to ask people, especially, I love the first question I often ask, is I look at today and I go, today's entrepreneurs are like yesterday's superheroes. And, you know, when you look at superheroes, you know, they all have a beginning. They have an origin story. You know, Batman has an origin story. Wonder Woman came from somewhere before she was Wonder Woman, all this other stuff. So what I'd like to know is, before Jason Hartman was, Jason Hartman, who was Jason Hartman?
Well, I was a fairly poor kid growing up in LA, and excuse me, just choked as I said that.
That's fine. Our history does that to us from time to time.
Yeah, I know. So let me take a drink of water. I looked the other direction and kind of swallowed at the same time. It was kind of weird. Excuse me. Anyway, so I was a fairly poor kid growing up in Los Angeles area. And when I was 16 years old, Jay, I saw what would be now called an infomercial. And it was an infomercial for a guy we've all heard of. It was Robert Allen, and he was touting one of his books. And I thought, gosh, you know, this real estate investing thing, this seemed very accessible to me as a 16-year-old, you know, something that even I could start doing in a few years. And so I got the book a couple days later. I read 3 whole chapters. I put it down, and my mom picked it up And she was not in real estate. We had no background in real estate at all, either as investors or in the business at all. And she picked the book up and she read the whole thing. I was only 16. I was a kid, careless. I didn't finish much at that age. Still now I find I have problems finishing things sometimes, but
yes, hire that done.
That's a whole execution time management discussion there, and an entrepreneurial ADD discussion maybe. But I put the book down, and what's interesting about it is she read the book, she started going to these real estate seminars, Jay, and she started studying all the gurus back in the day. And back in the day it was, Al Lowry, Robert Allen, there were a whole bunch of them out there, right? And that was kind of the old days of real estate investing gurus. And 2 years later, I was 18 years old. I was about to graduate from high school, and at the time we lived in Long Beach. And my mom said, Jason, you got me interested in this whole real estate thing. There's a big seminar this weekend up by Disneyland in Anaheim, California. Why don't you come and check it out? And so I thought, gosh, well, that sounds good. So, Jay, I promptly rounded up 9 of my friends from high school because at that age I couldn't do anything by myself. I had to get everybody involved. And so I rounded up 9 of my friends. I got them all to come to the seminar. And Friday night, the first speaker was a guy named Hal Morris. And I remember sitting there with 9 of my friends from high school and listening to Hal Morris, and he was talking about points, and I didn't know what points were. and so, I kind of started thinking, maybe I should just enroll in real estate school to learn the business. And I did that later, but just taking you through the seminar, it was a basic pitch fest, and they had all these different speakers, and I stayed through the whole weekend. Only one of my friends was there Saturday morning. Everybody else went to the beach. And I stayed all the way through Sunday evening, and I saw every speaker. And by then, I was turned on. I knew this real estate thing was pretty great. And I enrolled in Century 21 Real Estate School for $99. And I got my license in my first year of college. And I just started selling real estate part-time because I remember listening to Earl Nightingale. And I'm sure you've probably listened to Earl Nightingale. You've got a great reading list on your website, Jay, your virtual book club. And, Earl Nightingale's one of the old-time guys, Zig Ziglar, Dennis Whaley, all of those, Jim Rohn. I loved all those guys. And he said, if you want to get rich in real estate, just learn the business first. And so I did want to get rich in real estate, but I thought I'm just gonna start as a salesperson and figure it out. And that went really well. I started working when I was 14 years old because I always wanted to make money. I didn't like being poor very much. And
no one does.
Yeah, no one does. If they tell you they do, they're probably fibbing. And so I started doing that, and my first full month in the business, I just had my 20th birthday, and I made $43,000 in a month selling real estate to investors. Yeah. And
you
so
were ruined.
Yeah, I was ruined then. That was a pretty good start. And I was selling investor properties. I was selling government repo properties, HUD and VA repos. A little bit in Orange County, but mostly in the Inland Empire where the prices were lower, in Riverside, San Bernardino counties, and places like Fontana and Rialto. And I remember, Jay, the houses were all boarded up. They were dark. I showed property in my Volkswagen Jetta with a flashlight, and
nice.
You'd walk into these houses and you'd come out with flea bites all over your legs. It was pretty disgusting, but yeah. So that was the start, and then I started shortly after. I started being an investor, and it goes on from there.
Nice. And wow. I love the $43,000. That had to be a mindset shift right there. I mean, it's one thing because I'm assuming at that time, people, especially those who were in college or graduating college, the idea of making $43,000 a year was like, wow, that would be awesome.
Yeah, you know, you're absolutely right. I mean, back then, if you made $40,000 a year, that was pretty solid. If you made 100,000, you were awesome. You know, you got to adjust all these numbers for inflation, of course, which we'll probably talk about during this interview.
At
But
least
yeah,
once.
yeah.
So now I got a question because I'm sure at least I'm thinking it. You went Friday. There was one more person with you Saturday. By Sunday, you were the only one there.
Hmm.
I'm curious, where are those other 9 guys now?
You know, that's a good question, and I've got a high school reunion coming up, so I'm going to try and find out for you.
I think that's an interesting story because the one person who follows through ends up in a completely different spot than the others who were there. They were the right person. They were at the right place at the right time, but they weren't the right person, and therefore, I'm guessing they've generated different results.
Yeah,
Different
I
results.
think you are probably very right about that. Coming from such humble beginnings, I am pretty sure I am one of the most successful, if not the most successful, at least financially speaking, because that's what we're talking about on the show. People in my graduating class from high school, and it's amazing. You know, I didn't finish college. I was really quite bored with college after going for 2 years, give or take. I mean, I kind of went at a slower pace at some points, but after I started seeing what you can do in real estate as an entrepreneur, as a real estate entrepreneur, and I'll call that the side of being in the real estate business, helping clients. And I specialized in
Mhm.
helping investor clients because that was always my great love, is the investing side of the business. And then also being an investor. So it's interesting what happened a few months after I started in real estate. I had sold a little crappy one-bedroom condo in Huntington Beach to one of my clients. His name was Jim Wool. And I kind of wonder where Jim is nowadays. But I sold him this property on Coventry Lane in Huntington Beach. And about 6 months later, he came back to me, and I was selling him some other investment properties. And he said, Jason, I don't like this property. It's a one bedroom. Just don't get a very good quality tenant in a one bedroom property. So I'd like to sell it. And why don't you list it for sale for me? And I thought, hey, maybe, Jay, this is my chance. This is my chance to become an investor. I was just a salesperson. I was just a realtor before then. And so I ended up, instead of selling the property for Jim, I bought it from him. And I structured that deal and bought it from him. And then I had a crappy tenant. This is the reason he got rid of it. And I had my first real estate deal, seemed like it was going to be a bad experience. They paid for a couple of months and then they stopped paying and I had to evict them. My first experience was an eviction, right? I hardly ever have an eviction anymore. It's very rare. But that was my first bad experience. And one of the important things, and your listeners, I hope they're getting this, anything in life, you got to be persistent. You've got to have the right mindset. You've got to think long term. I remember something when I was selling real estate that my second real estate broker manager said to me. That was it when I worked for Remax, and I worked there for 12 years before I bought my own real estate company. And he said, I remember I came to him really discouraged one day, and, I had this geographical farm area, and I, said, this other guy, Mark, who was my competitor, he was just getting all the listings. The hot sheet came out, he had like 3 new listings in there, and, I wasn't doing anything, and I was knocking on doors and doing all this stuff. And I'll never forget what Tom said to me, my broker manager at the time. He said, Jason, don't suffer day to day. Add it all up at the end of the year and decide if you're happy or not. And that was brilliant, and that's what we've got to do as real estate investors, because unlike investing in stocks and bonds and, all of these crappy investments that just don't work. Okay. I call Wall Street the modern version of organized crime. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not going to disagree, but keep going.
Yeah, it really seems to be. And, when we're doing it ourselves as investors, we really feel the bumps in the road, don't we? We note everything that goes wrong, every little problem. We're dealing with it. And it's our job to keep our mind focused, to keep our eye on the ball, if you will, and to focus on the big reward at the end and not get distracted and discouraged by these little bumps in the road, because they happen on everybody's path to success, whether you're in real estate or business, or, you're an entrepreneur working on a career inside a company. It doesn't matter. We're all going to have setbacks.
What's funny about that is I often tell people that the road to success is paved with failure, and successive ones at that.
Right.
And it's crazy that for some reason we grow up and we get this idea in our head that, oh, my first deal is going to be awesome and I'm going to make a ton of money and I'm going to be like Jason and 43 grand. And then you get they didn't tell me at the front of the room that the tenant wouldn't pay the rent.
Right.
They forgot that part.
Yeah.
I was like, no, that happens a lot. And unfortunately, sometimes that's enough to make some of us just quit. And one of the more frustrating things, what's funny about real estate is, and I agree with you, it's a long-term thing. But the one of the good things about real estate is that it moves slow.
Mm-hmm.
One of the bad things about real estate is that it moves slow.
Right. Yeah. That's a great point you make, because real estate is this slow way to wealth. I mean, don't believe what you hear on the infomercials. There are always a few examples of people who, have had a few awesome flips. I've had a few awesome flips. But by and large, I've just become much more conservative over the years. I just like the slow road to wealth. I like cash flow. I like return on investment. I like buying and holding. I like investing much more than the active concept of managing contractors and workers in my properties and doing rehabs and flips. And, some people do that and they do well at it. But I think the distinction, Jay, is that the business of flipping homes is exactly that. It's a business. And, my firm, we help people become great investors. And the connotation of the word investor is that it's far more passive, whereas a business is a far more active process. It's something you're engaged in every single day. You got to watch every little thing. And, businesses are great. I own several businesses and I love business, but man, you're not going to take off and go travel around the world for 6 months and come back to the same business. Okay. But with your real estate portfolio, you just kind of oversee it. It moves slow, like you say. And that's one of the great things about it. I mean, I have had properties over the years where I've had tenants in my properties as long as 9 years with no vacancies. And, looking back, I think maybe I've had 3 conversations with a tenant over 9 years. It's a really nice, stable thing. One of the things I like to point out to people is that real estate, as a long-term buy and hold investment, has very few moving parts. And businesses, well, those have a lot of moving parts.
Every day.
Yeah.
One of the things that, before I go too far, while you've had a few awesome flips, I've had a ton of awesome flops. So I let go of the fix and flip thing a long time ago. However, we did retain the understanding of how to rehab property, and that has served us well when it comes to building, rehabbing and holding, because we do a ton of that and to create those possibilities. But one thing I want to make sure that we do underscore, while yes, you're talking to 2 guys or listening to 2 guys right now who love cash flow and passive investing, I want to underscore the fact that passive doesn't mean uninvolved. It doesn't mean you check out. It doesn't mean that you just set it and forget it. There's still the law of management is still in play. So don't make that mistake.
Yeah, Jay, that's a great point that you make to the listeners, because I don't think that there's any such thing as a passive investment. Look, lots of divestments are passive. Divestment mean you lose money. Those can be very passive. You can go and give your money to some guy in a nice suit that went to a great college who works at Merrill Lynch, and the likelihood is you're going to have a bad experience, okay? If you invest in stocks and those investments that people think are passive, like mutual funds, if you're treating that passively, you're probably not going to do very well. You got to pay attention to everything. Everything requires attention, and if you have property managers managing your long-term buy and hold real estate investments, you've got to manage your managers a little bit.
Oh, say that again. Say that again, because
Yeah.
I get that one all the time.
Right.
People say, I got a manager. I don't have anything to do. I'm like,
No.
oh, boy.
You have to manage your manager. And if you are managing yourself, and one of the great things that I'm really so happy with, Jay, is many of my properties I have managers, and many I self-manage. And what has been a wonderful surprise to me is that I've actually been able to pull off self-management long distance. I did not think I could do that. If you talked to me 5 years ago, I would have said that, my friend, is impossible. But I have proven that it is totally possible, and I can tell you that story if you like. But yeah, you've got to manage your managers. Okay, they require some supervision, and if you self-manage, of course, you got to manage your tenants.
And I think for me, and just these are more realizations that I come into. I mean, as some of most of the stuff that we hold, at least today, we've gotten rid of the majority of our single family, although we still do turnkey investments for people there. Most of what we still hold today is either commercial real estate or apartment buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes time. And this is probably one of the things, especially as I got more into developing the assets, I had to set my mind to understanding that it takes time first up front to develop the asset into something that produces cash flow. It's not buy it immediately and just, hey, everything is okay. And that upfront investment of time is key. And it's one of the things that's honestly, it's kept me from self-managing, because I wanted a higher return on time, especially since my kids are still, school age, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And I find that if you do have the ability to self-manage, you're usually working in the higher echelon of property or property classes or tenants. Is that your magic secret?
Well, our sweet spot, and we veer from this a little bit if the deal's good enough, but we love housing, first of all. We do it in many markets all over the country. Some of the markets we like are Atlanta, Memphis, Indianapolis, Houston, Birmingham, Kansas City, and many others. But that's just like an example of 6 of them. And so we kind of like, if you look at the median price in any of those cities, we want to be just below the median price. Maybe we're 10 or 20% below that median price in that market. We don't like the low end where, you need a gun to collect your rent. That's not the kind of thing we want to do, because although those properties have great numbers on paper, Jay, and I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but maybe I'm telling the listeners this, they seem to have great numbers on paper because the rent to value ratios are fantastic. But the problem is, and like you said, what they didn't tell you at the seminar, right, is that you just have huge collection problems. And when they're low-end properties, we recommend to all of our investors who are landlords, of course, we recommend that they make sure that they follow through. If they have a bad tenant and they have to evict them, or say they don't even have to evict them, but the tenant, damaged the property, go to court, get a judgment against that tenant, and, those judgments, once you get them, they do accumulate interest. A lot of times they can turn out to be a good investment, actually. And whenever that tenant, at some point in the future, that tenant, a lot of people say, well, that's a deadbeat tenant. They don't have any money. Oh, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard anybody say, because fortunes change. They will get money someday, maybe, hopefully, probably. If that tenant wants to buy a house or buy a car and finance it, that lender is usually going to say, you need to pay off this judgment before we will give you the loan. And that's when you're going to get paid, and you're going to get paid with interest. So our sweet spot is that kind of area, below the median price, in a good city, in a good neighborhood. So these aren't primo quality properties by any means. I mean, they're just, nice, basic single-family homes, and we do apartments as well. But we definitely like housing. I'm kind of curious to hear from you. What type of commercial real estate do you do other than apartments?
Yeah. That's instead of the commercial residential, we do commercial retail. So we'll do a strip center. It's usually one large tenant with a number of small tenants. That type of thing. Always triple net. The one we've got right now has a cell phone tower, so we look for additional plays,
Right.
and that type of value add. But the one thing I did want to say is, yes, I agree with you. Do not take a gun to go collect rent, but I will work in neighborhoods where I might need to take a knife. I won't take a gun. A knife is possible.
I love it.
Because we can definitely work. It comes down to systems, and at the end of the day, everyone, in my opinion, deserves a clean, safe, affordable place to live,
Right.
and we can do that in various different echelons of classes. Because C class doesn't mean no class. It just means you've got to have better systems, because those are, believe it or not, it is consistently possible to hit 90+% occupancy with way low collections if you've got the right systems. And
Right.
this is key. And I want everyone to hear this. This will not work in every marketplace, because not every marketplace is landlord friendly. It's tough to do in some marketplaces where it's not landlord friendly, if depending on how low you go, simply because you can't do you can't evict as fast if you need to. You just don't have the relationships. After a certain number of units, it's easy. Like today, my team, we can go talk to the chief of police. We can go talk to the mayor. We can go talk to those individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that gives us great leverage. So
Yeah.
keep that in mind as you're going out there to make these things happen. And then for the commercial real estate, we're doing two things in commercial retail, and I'm in the process of building a resort internationally. We're doing both of those things simultaneously right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And two completely target demographics. One is nothing but A class because it's brand new, out of the ground. And the other is just serving the same, instead of housing the person, it's where that person would shop. So it's the same customer in the sense that our tenant shops at certain stores. So what we do is we find a commercial center that they would shop at, and we buy that, and hopefully it has a cell phone tower, a billboard, or some other value add play that we can add to it to make all those things, come together and work very nicely. But again, it's always a redevelopment play in our case.
Right.
So we'll buy the existing construction as opposed to something that's vacant. At the end of the day, I end up putting. I would rather just purchase the permits in land. That's really what I'm purchasing, as opposed to having to go through that process. I want as much of a shell as I possibly can, so that we don't have to start over from blank ground. Okay. Hey, guys. So hopefully you have already left a rating and review, and you have already subscribed to the podcast on iTunes so that you can be entered for the drawing that we're going to be doing in a few days for another cash flow board game. So all you got to do is go over to iTunes, definitely make that happen for you. But what you're hearing us talk about a lot, if you're listening in between the lines and have ever heard the concept of investor identity, then you understand how you need to go out there and go get this type of information from the individuals that you are looking to deal and do business with. So make sure that you're doing that. Make sure that you understand the types of deals that other people have done in the past before you continue to try to go out there and sell them something you think is a great investment. Let's hear what Jason has to say.
Yeah, great points there, and the systems are critical, and investing in landlord-friendly markets. One of my semi-famous quotes, Jay, is this one, and I hope your listeners like this. I say, invest in places that make sense, so that you can afford to live in places that don't make sense.
Yes.
Yeah. So what that really means is this. Look, if you want to live in on the ocean in Santa Monica, a place that doesn't make sense to invest, right? Where it's very expensive, you have rent control, you have very landlord unfriendly environment. San Francisco, a lot of California is that way in general. Now, this doesn't apply to commercial real estate. Commercial real estate, they assume you're two business people that got together. You should know what you're doing. You live up to the contract or you're out, period.
Right.
But when it's residential, when it's someone's home, the tenant gets a lot of latitude in some areas, like California. And,
Right.
you know, like I lived in California almost all of my life, okay? So I completely know what it's like. And so we like places, you know, if you look at Texas, for example, Texas is landlord friendly versus being tenant friendly. And so we just try to find markets that are friendly to our cause as landlords. And you know, it's just a lot easier. You can get people out in 3-4 weeks, no problem.
Right.
The judge doesn't take a lot of excuses. If you're
Right.
in Washington, D.C., for example, you know, I've heard horror stories. We don't do that market, of course, but, you know, you can't kick them out on a day where there's a such and such % chance of rain. Well, that's a lot of days of the year in Washington, D.C.
Right.
You know, so.
Right. See, I didn't know that one about Washington,
Yeah.
D.C., but I know in some other northern states, if it's just too cold,
I know. Yeah.
you can't do it. And I'm just like, goodness, this
yeah.
is you can't run a business.
No,
Your
you can't.
operational expense goes through the roof. Listening and going, I don't know if I want to do real estate anymore.
Yeah. Well, you know, Jay, I mean, look, one of the things everybody has to understand, it's not like we're ganging up on tenants here. In order to have a civilized society, people have to live up to their agreements. Otherwise, you have anarchy. So it's just part of life. You know, if you can't afford the house, then move to a less expensive one you can afford, okay? And let me get someone who can afford my house. I mean,
Right. And that's one of the things I try to tell people is that what we do as real estate entrepreneurs is we make housing affordable. Now,
right, we do.
Many people know that we started with, you know, we'll do Section A, we do C class, but that doesn't always mean, because when I use the word affordable, that's what they gravitate towards. We make housing affordable. Like, for example, take the resort. If you wanted to travel to a faraway destination and stay overnight, you would need a place to stay. And instead of having to go through the expense of building a place for yourself to stay, we give you the privilege of staying at our resort instead.
Right.
Which therefore means we made housing affordable for you for that particular situation. And we just got to keep it clean and safe. And we do this over and over and over again in so many different ways. And I think as real estate investors, we have the ability to go out there and change neighborhoods. We have the ability to make such an impact. I may not be able to fight the war, quote unquote, on drugs myself, but I can move them, gosh darn it. And I've done this.
Right.
I can do that. I can change a zip code, and we can go be that difference that many times we hope someone is out there doing.
That is a great, great philosophy. I just love that. And you know, the market, I mean, look at the opportunity here we've got over the coming years and the market we're going to serve. We have got the highest student loan debt level in human history, well over $1 trillion, that's with a T, $1 trillion in student loan debt. This student loan debt is applied to the largest demographic cohort in American history. That's Generation Y, okay? All the kids, you know, just going into and getting out of college now in that age, and, you know, up to about 30 years old, depending on who you're listening to. They all divide it a little differently. But Generation Y, that's 80 million Americans. That is larger than the baby boomers, who were 76 million. And just look at how the baby boomers changed the economy as they were moving through certain years of their lives. And with Generation Y, I say they are going to be renting longer than any other generation in history. And the reason I believe that is, number one, that crushing obligation of very high student loan debt, an anemic job market. You see a lot of people underemployed, okay, where, you know, they've got a college degree, a master's degree, they're working at Starbucks, right? They're just overqualified for the job. This student loan debt is not dischargeable in bankruptcy. I think that is a real scam. I think it's probably almost intentional, where they've made a whole generation of indentured servants. But let me tell you something. With the situation they're in, we as investors are here to serve this 80 million person cohort, and they're probably going to be delaying marriage and household or family formation longer than any other generation in history. So that means they're going to be renters. And you know what we can provide them? Just like you said, Jay, about the people in your resort. There was a time in the U.S. where if people wanted to go across the country or on a long trip, they had to sleep in their car. Before Holiday Inn and Howard Johnson's and all those hotel chains came along, people had to camp. And then a whole new breed of entrepreneur came along and served those people. And so we are serving these people because the best thing that Generation Y or anybody can have on their resume when they're looking for a job in a competitive market is mobility. And as renters, they have a lot more mobility than being homeowners. So it is very wise for them to rent because they can go where the jobs are. But at the same time, I say be a real estate investor and rent properties to other people. That doesn't, you can still play in the real estate game and be a renter yourself. Like Robert Kiyosaki has. I know you're close to Kiyosaki, and I just had him on my show for the second time just last week. And, your house is a liability. It's not an asset. It does not produce income. Anything that does not produce income is not an asset. Okay? You've got to have income, cash flow, rent, or it's not an asset. So your house is just an expense. Everybody needs a place to live. You can rent it, you can own it, doesn't really matter. Just understand that's an expense. Okay?
Indeed. You're getting me all kinds of excited right now because I try to tell people this all the time. Living in Southern California, I don't think the pricing of houses makes sense. So I rent the house instead of buying the house.
Isn't that awesome? Yeah.
It makes that makes sense to me
yep.
as opposed to spending $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in a down payment, which is the same in my head as prepaying rent for 10 years.
Oh, Jay.
Why would I want to do that?
Jay, you are, man, we're like soulmates here because you are preaching to the choir, my friend. So let me tell you the story. I think your listeners will like this one, okay? When I lived in Southern California, I lived in Irvine, Newport Beach most of my adult life in those areas. And I was buying and selling houses and, kind of treating my home as an investment. Then I had other rental properties. And 10 years ago, I started investing nationwide because I knew the recession was going to hit again, and boy, it did. We know that. And I thought, I am not going to have all my eggs in this basket again like I did in the 90s. That was kind of painful in the 90s, okay? And so I started looking across the country and thinking, there is no such thing as a U.S. real estate market. There are really about 400 local markets in a country as large and diverse as the United States. There is no national housing market. That is complete BS, okay? You hear these guys on CNBC, you read stuff in the media, in the newspapers, whatever. They talk about the housing market. Well, what are they talking about? Are they talking about Los Angeles or Dallas or Houston or Miami or Atlanta or Chicago? I don't know where the housing market is in the U.S. There are about 400 markets here. And so 3 years ago, I personally moved out of California where I pretty much always owned a house that I lived in. I sold my house for just under $1 million there, and I moved to Phoenix, Arizona. And my first place there, I rented this gorgeous penthouse. It was twice the size of the place I was living in Southern California.
Oh, no, here we go.
And Jay, I loved being a renter, and I'm still a renter, although I own, some with partners, about 160 doors, 160 units, okay? And I'm developing 71 houses in Kansas City and, doing all kinds of great stuff like that. But you don't have to own the place in which you live. You can just rent it. And so this place, let me just tell you, one of our metrics is we like to get at least 1% per month from our investment properties. So that means if you buy a single family home for $100,000, I want to see you get at least $1,000 a month. Hopefully you get $1,100 or $1,200 a month for that property.
Right.
So that's the metric, 1% rent to value ratio. But listen to this one. I rented this place in Phoenix with beautiful, views all over the place, the tallest building in the city. I mean, it was incredible. 3,700 square feet, brand new, 10-foot ceilings, Gorgeous place.
Nice.
And here I am renting this place that is probably worth 1.5, maybe $2 million, and I'm paying a whopping $3,600 a month.
Oh, do
Now,
not let my wife hear that.
yeah, and now if I was going to invest 1.5 million or $2 million, Jay, I want to get 15 to 20,000 a month, 1%.
Right.
It just when you're living in the high end, the ratios get all out of whack in your favor. So rent a high-end home and own a lot of lower-end properties you rent to other people. Much more advantageous. I call this rental arbitrage.
Yep. All day long,
Yeah.
baby. That's exactly what people keep looking at me funny. Now, I got a question for you because
Sure.
I get I get this weird look. Like when we were looking for a place to stay and we were filling out applications and people go, "What do you do?" And we tell them, and then
Yeah.
they're like, "Hold on, you own how many units?"
I know, it's hilarious. I know. I get that too. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm just making sure it wasn't just me because
Right.
it was weird. They're like, this doesn't make sense. How can you own hundreds of units
Yeah.
and you're renting from me? I don't get it.
Oh, it's hilarious. They ask me for a bank statement and then they almost fall over and they think, "Why don't you buy a place?" And I go, "Because I'm smart."
Yeah. Oh man, I feel like I found a brother right now.
Right. Yeah, you did.
You're killing because I was, people can't relate. Doesn't sound like a problem, but it's still frustrating. It's like, don't you understand? Maybe you should come to a seminar or something so I can show you what we're talking about here.
All you got to
But
do,
this
folks, is just do the math. It's real easy. Just if you can rent it for a lot less than 1%, and you can buy other rentals and rent them to other people for 1% or more, boy, you should rent your own place and own a
Right.
lot of rentals you rent to other people.
that I try to tell people this all the time. People need a place to live, work, play, or lay, and you will likely be able to provide that place less expensive than actually trying to buy that place. I call California, Hawaii, and New York the land of money, and everywhere else is the land of cheap housing.
Yeah.
And that's been our strategy for quite some time. And I was like, it's definitely something that has paid off. So let me ask you this: how does the idea when you're talking to someone these days, they're looking at you, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you've been doing this for so long. There's no way on earth I could ever get started." What would you say to that person today who's listening, maybe for the first time, going, "I like what these guys are talking about, but man, can I do it?"
You know what? Anybody can do this. I mean, we've helped thousands and thousands of clients do this over the years. And you just have to start. I mean, everything in life comes down to just doing what is in front of you. Overcome the paralysis of analysis if you have that. Overcome your fear if you have that. Maybe those are the same thing. Just do something. I mean, like Nike says, just do it. Just dive in and do it. And life is it really, the training that works in life is on the job training. It's funny when I see these commercials for these stock platforms where you can trade stocks, and Wall Street's a scam. We already discussed that. But they have these things where you can build like a model portfolio, and you can track your portfolio and see what it would have done without using real money, right?
Mhm.
And in real estate, you can do that. You can go to all the seminars, you can analyze everything as long as you want, but until you put your own money in a deal, you will not bring the presence of mind
Mhm.
to the table, to the
Mhm.
deal, that you would in theory. Life is not a textbook, it's not a lecture, it's doing things. And I have learned more by doing things than I will ever learn. Make some mistakes, fail fast, and have your failures be as cheap as possible. You're going to learn a lot from the failures. And just, it's pretty inexpensive to fail nowadays in a lot of ways. So I always say, when I'm training salespeople, I say, if you want to succeed more often, just increase your failure rate. If you want to become a great investor, just go out there, do something, make some mistakes, pick yourself up, get over it, and move on. And you will be a great investor eventually.
At some point they're good. The people listening are going to be like, okay, did these two know each other? Because I'm always saying to people, you need to fail fast, fail forward, and fail frequently.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
That's exactly what you're saying. And the other thing, because it sounds like you've encountered this person who's the perpetual seminar attendee, always thinking about it and thinking about it. And I practice what I call JI, just in time training.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to know until I need to know.
Yeah.
And until that moment, I don't care. I didn't bother researching cell phone tower leases until I actually owned a cell phone tower on my property. It didn't really matter until then. At that moment, now it's real. It's really, really real that this is actually happening. It didn't matter till that moment. And now that it matters, it's something I know a lot more about. Simply not just book knowledge, but experiential knowledge. And that's exactly what I think it holds people back, is that they try to look at the entire staircase before they take the first step.
Absolutely.
And there's so much value in making mistakes.
Right. No question about it. Yeah. Jay, there is a great book. You've probably read it, or at least I'm sure you've heard of it. And it's a metaphor for anything in life. And it's about business. It's a business book mostly for techie people. It's called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And the Lean Startup methodology has changed the business world of high-tech startups dramatically. It's a fantastic book. But, we're talking about real estate investing. And it means a lot to a real estate investor. It answers the question you raised a few minutes ago. And here's the basic concept. And you can apply this to any area of life. You could apply it to, real estate. You could apply it to business. You could apply it to anything you want to do or learn or be, whatever it is. And the concept is basically this. If you have a business idea, you create what's called an MVP, a minimum viable product. And then you put it out in the marketplace and you really, really pay attention to the feedback. And your customers will tell you how to improve the product if you listen closely, okay? And then you keep improving and you keep iterating. And what I want to say to your listeners about your question of what would you tell someone who hasn't started is that life is an iterative process. Iteration. You do something, you iterate it. You keep changing it, you keep modifying it, you keep tweaking it along the way. You'll never know everything you need to know before you get in. You've just got to jump in and learn as you go largely. It doesn't mean that education isn't important. Just don't get hung up on education. It is what it is. It's great. Have it. Learn some things. Do some things. Learn some more things. Do some more things.
I'm laughing because I was just saying not too long ago that the most important thing to do is to get into what I call the feedback loop. You don't know nothing. I don't care how much time you spend developing your pro forma, your business plan. At best, this is what we think would happen should these things occur to the people we believe are our customer and what they want.
Right.
And none of it matters until they've actually put $1 down and you've gotten complaint one that says, hey, it should be this way and you got to change it like this.
Yeah.
And it's so funny how many changes, because the business you have today, if you have a business, and I'm just going to ask you this, the business you have today, I'm willing to bet isn't the business you envisioned when you started.
Oh, God, no.
Not even close.
Not even close. It's so different. I had no idea what opportunities would be presented to me, what obstacles would be presented to me. I just had to go through them day to day. You just have to start where you are and do things. And maybe the quote we'll kind of start wrapping up with is this one. I love this quote. And it's from Zen. It's a Zen saying, and it's, to know and not to do is to not yet know.
Yep.
To know and not to do is to not yet know. Yeah.
So you got to share with us. I know you've got a great podcast. I'm sure after listening, people are like, "Oh, great! Now there's 2 of them." So let me let's tell them how they can find out more about you and what you're up to.
Well, there's more than 2, but thanks. Yeah, it's the Creating Wealth Show, and it's all free on iTunes. And feel free to listen to it. I'd love to have your people listening to my show, and you can find me at jasonhartman.com or on iTunes. Just type Jason Hartman in the iTunes store. And thanks so much for talking to me. And I really love all the stuff we have in common. And for the audience, I should say the first time we ever spoke was yesterday, right?
I know.
So,
there was no pre-meeting about,
Nope.
hey, here's what we're going to talk about. It just comes on out.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. Well, Jay, keep up the great work. And, it's just great that there are people like you out there inspiring investors to go and, just jump on their dreams and just go do it. It is a great time. The demographics coming our way for rental property over the next 10 years are nothing short of phenomenal. We didn't even get to talk about the economy and the prospect of inflation or any of that stuff, but that's looking pretty awesome too. You can lock in, at historically low interest rates. I mean, think about it, Jay. Someone who gets a mortgage on a single family home today will not make the last payment on that mortgage until 2044. Do you know how awesome that is to get 3-decade-long fixed rate debt like that? It's you get paid to borrow. It's phenomenal.
We're going to end up having a whole new episode if we keep talking right now.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed this particular episode, because I know I have, and I know you can hear that. We're just excited because we get to provide value. We get to live and work in our passion and do the things that make a difference. And we just happen to use real estate. Understand, real estate's a collection of benefits. If spoons provided the same benefits that real estate did, we would have been talking about spoons today, but it doesn't. So with that being said, you know what it's time to do? It's time to move at the speed of instruction. He's got a podcast. Go look it up and get started. It's fun talking to you guys one more time, and I look forward to hearing from all of you soon. Until next time.